Welcome to Second Saturday Conversation, Going Home to Another Way. I know that the text from Matthew talks about going home by another way, but I'm suggesting in our conversations that not only do we want to find another way of how we understand and talk about Christianity in and for the 21st century, we need to go about it differently, but I think that it'll bring us to a different place, maybe to a different sense of what it means to be home. And I know that home is such an evocative image. I've quoted Augustine, our hearts are restless until they find rest in God. There's a restlessness that we have in our hearts. Rilke talks about the great homesickness we can never shake off. But I am wondering if really home is right where we are, in the midst of the human condition, and that it's our experience of the human condition, all of it, that we will come to find home. Megan, do you want to give us a little orientation or a few cues about how we work with Zoom and all of that this morning?
Yes, one second. Let me pull that up here real quick. I'm going to admit a few more people before we get into this. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I keep seeing in the chat, most people have some snow, so a beautiful morning outside. So good morning. I have the slightly unsavory portion of the morning. Just a reminder to please keep yourselves muted throughout the conversation this morning, unless you are called upon by myself, Marianne, or Jeff when we get to the plenary later. If you do have questions or comments during the conversation, I ask that you please direct them to the chat, which you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. We want to use that space as a place for your comments related to the topic for the day, and we will draw from that chat space for our plenary session. And if you want to be called upon, you can also indicate so in the chat before the plenary. So as stated, we will have a plenary at the end of the presentation with Jeff Cresswell, our moderator. This will be a time to reflect on the thoughts and ideas shared by Marianne. If you would like to personally connect with Marianne, we are offering a coffee time from 11 to 11:15 after the presentation and the plenary. Again, if you have any questions during the conversation, please direct them to the chat. Please keep yourselves muted unless called upon. Jeff Cresswell and myself will be monitoring the chat section, and during the plenary, Jeff will call upon you to ask your question or share your thoughts, at which time you can unmute yourself. Thank you so much for your time and space, and enjoy the morning.
Thanks, Megan. You almost sound like a flight attendant.
I have it down.
So here we go. Today, I'm going to talk about hermeneutics and theopoetics. I'm going to begin to kind of explore what those two things are about. I think that both hermeneutics and theopoetics are really important as we think about Christianity in the 21st century. I've thought about, if I get two more dogs, I may name them hermeneutics and theopoetics. And somebody will say to me, Marianne, why did you name your dogs hermeneutics and theopoetics? And I will say, I'm so glad you asked. And then I will go on to say more, which I will with you in just a few minutes. But let me start the morning with just a few brief quotes. The first one, familiar to you, I use it every time. It's from Van Morrison's song that we hear as a lead-in to our time together. So a quote from Van Morrison: "When heart is open, you will change, just like a flower, slowly opening." From the prophet Ezekiel: There in a valley, dry bones, very dry bones. Speak to those bones and make those bones, those very dry bones, come to life. From the Gospel of Mark. And Jesus asked the blind beggar, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he said, "Help me see again." And from the Gospel of Luke, he took bread, broke it, then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. Hermeneutics. Hermeneutics means interpretation. It's actually the theory of the art of interpretation. Okay? And I want to lay out a couple of things as we understand interpretation. One is that we all inhabit the world. I mean, we all inhabit the world, okay? And how we inhabit the world, it matters. And I would put it this way, that how we love the world matters. Because if we don't love the world, love this world, love the privilege of our existence that has been given us, we didn't ask for it, but to love all of the wonder and vagaries of our existence. If we don't love the world, I don't think we're going to make it. I'll put that out there right away. I think it's really important how we inhabit the world and that we love it. And how we inhabit the world is reflected in how we see the world, how we perceive, how we understand it. And understanding requires a kind of empathy. So how we inhabit the world will affect how we interpret the world. It will reflect how we interpret the world, okay? And interpreting is a very human thing that we do. It lies at the heart of who we are. We're the ones who wonder and who wonder where we're going and who wonder what all of this is about. And so we interpret. That's just what we human beings do. We interpret. We create meaning. We seek understanding. Okay. So hermeneutics, the art of interpretation. It's a given. We interpret our life in the world. We can't help it. It's what we human beings do. Something else I want to say about the world we inhabit. We do not live in a fixed universe or world or life. We live in a world that will not stand still. We live in a world that is dynamic, it's fluid, it's open to change. I think that metamorphosis is kind of the stuff of the world. Metamorphosis is always going on. And I think it's a very human thing for us to want to and to seek change as things are changing, to change with the changed, okay? And this fluidity, this dynamic, this lack of fixedness, this is part of the human condition that we have to deal with. This is not something we can mend, okay? This is a given. We live in a fluid, not a fixed, not a static world or universe or life. So I think at the root of interpretation, what stirs us to wonder and to imagine and to seek understanding is, this is very obvious, but it is our human condition. Okay. And I've talked about this before. It's like, what stirs us to come up with symbols and language and religions, and what stirs us? It's our dealing with our own human condition. And then what kind of thoughts do we construct to interpret our experience of our lives? Okay, our experience of finitude and majesty, our experience of mortality, our experience of creativity and stagnation, our hospitality and our hatreds, our sense of empathy and dissociation, our sense of just all of the things that drive us to seek understanding and meaning and interpretations, all the things about the human experience. So what drives us to seek interpretation? It's our human condition. And hermeneutics is the theory of the art of interpretation, the art of how we interpret our world. So let me say something else about interpretation. We all enter a world that has already been interpreted, okay? There's no such thing as our coming in. We may feel like we come in as a blank slate or as a open canvas, but we all enter a world that is already functioning with presuppositions and with norms that have been created and language, and we come into a ready-made context. We're born into a system that's up and running, that's already governed by a kind of worldview, okay? So, and worldviews, they also change when other things break in and shift our understanding of reality and how things work and so forth. We go through these, paradigm shifts. We go through these different understandings of how the world works, and therefore, in a sense, who we are within them. Okay. So when thinking about interpretation, it's just important that we remember that it's a given that we are all situated in a given place and time. Okay. We've inherited presuppositions. And all of that gives us an angle, an approach, or a perspective, an interpretation of the way truth opens up to us, the way things happen to us, okay? So we're all situated. So I think what I want to underscore here is that we are deeply influenced by interpretations. And we come into a world that's already interpreted, and interpretations change. Okay. So let me now move to this, that every truth, okay, now this is, we can talk about this. Every truth is a function of interpretation. Whatever truth means for us is a function of interpretation. So hermeneutics, we might say, is a way that we talk about the truth. What is true? What is real? Okay. And now here's the next step, which may make some of us a little uncomfortable. But I suggest that with all of this in mind, that there are no absolute truths. There are no absolute truths. There are many truths determined by situation, by context, by our particular angle, okay? But what I want to be quick to say is that that does not mean that anything goes. or that nothing matters? Hardly. The art of interpretation involves finding appropriate presuppositions, or, the best ones that seem to work, that speak most to our human condition, to avoid wrong ones if we can, to find more plausible possibilities rather than less plausible ones. Interpretation, it's not just opinions, but interpretations require insight and sensitivity and recognition of our situation and judgment. There are good interpretations and bad ones. There are good reasons and bad reasons. There are things that are productive in our understanding of truth, and there are things that are dead ends. Okay. So my suggestion is that there are no absolute truths, but there are a multiplicity of truths. And again, hermeneutics, the art of interpretation, it seeks to address the whole of the human condition, body, soul, heart, our deepest selves in any given time and place. So let me also say this, and this is why I think it's important that we talk together about interpretation. What do we make of what I'm talking about? I think that we are all in the midst of a major change in how we inhabit the world, how we understand the world, and therefore our efforts to interpret the world. And I think that most of us in our age cohort are living in a tension between our understanding of the world from the modern era and our understanding of the world in this postmodern era. I think modernity and post-modernity, and by the way, we may be in post-modernity by now, but I'm not there yet myself, but so there will be something after post-modernity. But I think there are two different frameworks for interpretation. The modern worldview from late 17th century on to, boy, I would say into the 1940s, 50s. The postmodern worldview is one that has been come into play and into a kind of clarity. That's a sort of ironic that I would use that word because there's so much paradox in postmodern understanding. But I think it really made its entry onto the public conversation in the 60s. 1968 was a really pivotal year, as we know. So I think that many of us are still in a tension between what we assume the world is from the modern point of view and what we actually, how we experience the world in a postmodern worldview. Okay, and I'm going to remind us about characteristics of each in just a second. Let me say that I think Christianity has been, the way we interpret Christianity and understand it, the way we've talked about it in the modern era, has been deeply shaped and influenced by the worldview that we supposed in the modern era. And I think that has accounted for instance, strong theology and a kind of sense of the victorious sovereignty of God. I think that all has come out of our understanding of how the world works from the modern era. Okay, so let me now just, in general, characterize a few things about the modern and the postmodern era. Okay, and as I said, I think that even though we really are living in postmodern, we're inhabiting a postmodern world. I think many of us aren't quite there yet. So a couple of things about modernity. That it assumed that there was a big story, a mega story, a meta story a meta narrative that would cover all phenomenon. that there was some unified system. And we understand that too in terms of God, that God is kind of the ultimate, that God is in charge of how things are going to turn out, that God is sovereign in the world, that truth is related in many ways to how we reason God. And the modern era tended to be a little bit more rule bound. It's like rigorous methodology was important, not showing a lot of deference to exceptions, a binary way of thinking that there are separate categories, that there's objective, subjective, that there's public, private, that there's reason and emotion, that there's theistic and atheistic, that it's sort of either or. There was a much more definitive, it's either this or that, seeking separate categories for clarity and distinguishing things. The modern era sought certitude. It assumed that there is a certitude, a plan, a overarching unified way that the world works. And the language of the modern era is quite propositional. It's a language of sort of establishing proofs or trying to, okay? And assuming that there are some predictable outcomes. And how do we best organize and control our lives to assure those outcomes? And the modern era, I think, assumed that there were absolute truths, that there were absolute truths. And as I said a moment ago, I think this is where this notion of God as being sovereign, of being an absolute truth, that there is one way, there is the way of understanding God. And for us Christians, it just happens to be that, you know, we're the ones that have it right about God. Okay, I'm being a little cheeky there, but this sense that the victorious understanding of God and the church militant, it's like, this is what is right. This is what is true. This is absolute, how we understand God. And therefore, our whole lives need to be in accord with our understanding of that. Right? Now, so I think strong theology comes out of a modern mindset, modern view mindset, a modern interpretation of how the world is. Okay. Now, the threat of modernity, okay, that's the threat of modernity, is absolutism, a kind of tyranny, okay? And I dare say that that will fell us, okay? If we don't move out of and beyond a modern, as I'm describing it, worldview, I think our claims to absolute truth and what is absolutely appropriate, true, right, I think it leads to violence. It leads to wanting to conquer those who don't understand that. I mean, think of how much blood has been shed in the name of our one true God in Christianity. Okay, so I think we have to move away from this modern worldview. I don't think we'll make it if we don't. Okay, and I don't know if that means in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, but I think that the modern worldview, we've gotten a lot from the Enlightenment. Okay, the Enlightenment has given us so much. So let's take all of the good things that the Enlightenment has given us, better inroads into science and lack of superstition and all kinds of things. So there's some goodness here. Okay, so again, I don't want to make this black and white. There's a lot that we've gained from the Enlightenment, but its big threat is a kind of absolutism that I think evokes, it prompts violence, and I think it's dangerous, and I think it will keep us from loving the world the way we must. Okay, so postmodern. So here are some descriptions of postmodernity. There isn't one big truth. There isn't one big story. I know we keep looking for a unified theory, but maybe there isn't one, okay? And postmoderns are kind of incredulous that we will look for one unified theory or story, but the image for postmoderns is more of a web, like the World Wide Web, okay? So there's interconnectedness. It's more of a web idea. But it's not about being unified. The watchword in postmodernism is diversity, okay? That there's a multiplicity of ways of being, that there are variants. You know, I mean, think about sexuality. It's not just heterosexual, homosexual. Gender is very fluid. There's all kinds of variations, you know, that are expressed, that are true, that, you know, so it's not just this or this. It's not this binary either or. The binary categories miss so much of what else is going on, okay? Postmodernism thinks about things as an open system, that the world that we inhabit is really open-ended, that it's open-ended, that there are endless possibilities, and that those possibilities, not only do we help to engage them, I mean, they break into our world. So it's not as controlled and predictable as in the modern worldview, but it's more dynamic, it's more creative, it's more, it requires more imagination. It's, and that the categories, it's not, as I said, this or this, you know, in physics, it's like, it's a particle and a wave, depending upon how you look at it. Or, you know, that an object observed behaves differently, or a particle observed behaves differently than one that isn't. And this whole notion of entanglement, that what's happened here can affect something, you know, it's like, wow, you know, it's a very dynamic world that we live in. We're discovering this. And so for postmoderns, there are no separate categories. The boundaries that we live in, the world that we inhabit, is much more porous. There are much more irregularities. There are truths, but it's not capital T, and it's plural. It's like there are a multiplicity of truths, of possibilities, that uncertainty is really what we live in. The modern worldview seeks certitude. Postmodern says certitude, don't know what it is, okay? So there's an undecidability in the postmodern world, okay? There's a fluidity, there's an openness, there's a sense that we don't know. And we won't know. And yet even so, we are to love this about the world as well, to love this openness about the future and what is possible. And I think also what underlies postmodern, now not everybody will agree with me on this, but I think that truly there is a commitment that the deep structure of things, it may be a metamorphosis, it may change, but that there is a goodness, there is an integrity in the world, in the inner workings of things, in the deep structure of life, okay? So postmodern is a very different worldview, very different set of assumptions than modern. And I think many of us live in the tension of that. We're not quite in the postmodern reality yet. We'd still love to think that there's certitude. And we feel betrayed when we think, you know, gosh, the world isn't clear, it isn't certain for us. And no, that's just the way it is. Now, the major threat of postmodernism is relativism. this sense that, well, if there are, then everything's relative and you can't say that anything is right or wrong. Well, I think we need to scuttle those oppositions, those either ors, get rid of the ruse that it's either absolute or it's relative. Okay. I think that's a cynical way of going about this. I think that the uncertainties of postmodernity, it doesn't mean that anything goes. It's not relativistic in a reductionistic sense. It just says there's a plurality of things, which suggests that how we interpret what we experience is really, really important. Okay. So there is a surplus of meaning, and it is essential that we take on the responsibility of interpretation. How we interpret and how we inhabit the world, we are responsible for how we live and take care of, and we are responsible for the consequences in the world. Okay. Somebody said that the death of God in the 60s, you know, the Newsweek article and all this, that the God of supernatural theism, the death of that God, okay, that the death of God was the birth of human responsibility. I think that's an interesting comment. We need to be responsible for how we inhabit the world, okay, for how we love it. And if we don't, we will avoid making decisions. We'll say, well, I'm just following the rules that have already been given to me. I was just following orders. Okay. I think we need to rethink that. Or I believe this, that without Jesus, I'm not going to go to heaven. That's a ton of suppositions. Those are all based on interpretations. And I think it's important that we recognize them as such. Okay. Those are interpretations. I don't want to dismiss them, but I want to identify them for what they are. Those are interpretations. And they determine how we live and imagine and wonder and what we think is important. So hermeneutics today, the theory of the art of interpretation, that we're living in a time now where we're negotiating multiple truths. We're coping with the shifting of tides and circumstances. We're living in a world with competing truths. So how do we co-inhabit a world? How do we live in it non-violently with all of these competing tensions? You know, we live with an acute sense of change and uncertainty, and we're not sure where we're going. So with that in mind too, I'll be really curious to hear from you how you think that affects how we understand and how we talk about Christianity in the 21st century. Okay. Let me say something really positive about this postmodern sensibility. Postmodernism is hopeful. It's hopeful because it believes that the future will always be better. Postmodernism affirms this open-ended, that we live in an open-ended world, that it's not a safe, closed system, that the future is open, that innovation and reinvention and possibilities are endless. And rather than that being frustrating, it excites the imagination and the human disposition towards what is it like to be part of that kind of dynamic world. postmodernism, because of all of the sense of goodness in the deep structure of things, that grace will come. That it's what Jack Caputo calls an event. That there are things that will break into our world that we cannot imagine right now. We don't know what they're going to be, but that it will open up a sense of future. It opens up future possibilities rather than shuts them down. If we don't believe in a future, we'll just sit in our anxiety about it. Postmodernity says the future will be better. It believes that the future will always be better, that it will be more dynamic, more wondrous, more diverse, more life-giving. So postmoderns, at our best, are people of hope, that the future will always be better. We have a trust in that, a confidence in that. And confidence is a faith in that, which is much stronger than beliefs. Okay. For the postmodern, truth is an event. It's something that will happen to us, that will break into our world, that will give us a greater sense of possibility. Okay. So, and when I think about Christianity, I think that Christianity is all about hope. Jesus is an embodiment of the human condition. Jesus is fully human. Jesus is a human being like us. And how he was in the world, how he loved it, even amidst difficulties and crises and domination systems and violence, and he loved it even so. And even though he was executed, okay, and I'll say more about how the cross and maybe speaks to a postmodern way of understanding Christianity. I'll do that in April when Eastertide comes. But the execution of Jesus is also really, really problematic, unless you put it in a modern frame that says, well, he had to die for our sins. Okay, that kind of tidies it up in a way. But Christianity really deals with the vagaries of the human condition and also the graces. So I think Christianity does speak to us in the 21st century, in the postmodern era. It can. And part of it will be how we understand it and how we interpret it. And again, this is for our conversation. I'm curious to know what you think. So let me quickly now, let me turn to theopoetics. I'm repeating myself, I know, but with hermeneutics, why I think that's so important is that we live in an interpreted world. Truths don't come down from on high as a given, okay? That's my premise. That just isn't true. So we need to take more responsibility for what we believe, how we believe it, and how we inhabit and live in the world. And not just because so-and-so said that this is the way it is, okay? Or, oh dear, do I want to go here? You know, climate deniers, people who deny climate change. That's an interpretation. And it behooves us to really think through what that's about, okay? And the consequences and implications of that, and how we love the world and one another. Okay, theopoetics. I'll make this kind of brief. Theopoetics, as a distinction from theological, theology. Now, I want to say right out front that theopoetics is not a substitute for theology. So theology is important, just like the Enlightenment, a lot of things we gain from the Enlightenment is important. A lot of theological thought and so forth, it's important. We want to build on that. I don't want to get rid of that, okay? But theopoetics is something that can walk parallel to theology and I think can open it up. So theopoetics, what is theopoetics? Poesis, and by the way, it's not just using poems as part of your sermon or your class, okay? It's poesis means to make or to create, okay? So it's a style of language about God. It's a way that we talk about how we make God, how God is made real, okay? It's a kind of language that tries to express how God happens in the here and now, or it's a way of paying attention to things. And it's a language style, okay? It's a way of, we think differently, so we put it differently. It's a language style, a way of making language about God that is, has more in line with the poets. It's more imaginative, it's more suggestive, it's more evocative, it's not propositional. It doesn't try to explain, it tries though to express, okay? It's more symbolic language. It makes more use of metaphor, for instance. It's not fantasy. Theopoetics is not about making things up it's fantasy, but it's not propositional language. And a lot of biblical studies language tends to be more lawyerly than poetic. It tends to be more propositional than sort of descriptive. Let me return to the language I used in the beginning of this session. When quoting from Van Morrison, when heart is open, you will change, just like a flower slowly opening. That's not propositional language. That doesn't explain anything. But there's something for me about that language. When heart is open, I kind of get what that means. You will change. That resonates. I understand that. And you will change like a flower slowly opening. I mean, that's actually a lovely image. It makes me think some more. It makes me want to look again at this. It makes me wonder. It opens the aperture of my imagination to think, what are you saying here? And I actually can experience it. I experience it. That language helps me experience something. Okay, can you relate to that? Or for instance, Ezekiel, the valley has very dry bones. Okay, speak to those bones and make those very dry bones come alive. Now this is metaphor. What are we talking about? Well, it's multivalent. I might think right now that there's some stuff about Christian faith that's like, unfortunately, it's like dry bones scattered over the valley. It's like, and very dry bones. How can we speak to the very structure of Christianity in a way that can bring it alive? It can make it more alive for us. It's like, no, these propositions, if you let them just be propositions, they're going to get ossified. They're going to become dry bones. How to speak to our faith, to our tradition, to our understanding that makes it alive, okay? That's the language of theopoesis, theopoetics. Or, you know, my borrowing from Mark's gospel, the blind beggar, help me see again. What can I do for you? Here's this holy man, a healer. What can I do for you? Help me see again. I can, that gives me pause. It makes me wonder, what if a holy man and healer said to me, Marianne, what do you want me to do for you? And I am so struck that Bartimaeus says, help me see again. He knows he's missing something. You know, we don't all have 20/20 or 360. Help me see again. That's taking the text and letting it speak, breathe, okay? That's theopoiesis, I think. Or the Luke passage that I quoted. You know, Jesus is at table, he broke the bread. The story goes, he broke the bread and then their eyes were opened. He broke the bread. Something got broken open. What is Luke describing here? Something breaks open. Their eyes were opened and they recognized Jesus. They recognized him. That, I think, is theopoetic language, which I think is very, I think most that the Gospels, I think, are written theopoetically. I think most of the language of our sacred scripture is theopoetic. It's way of describing how God happens for us. In the breaking of the bread, our eyes are open. What does that mean? It invites us to explore more, okay? And so hermeneutics, okay? Hermeneutics is the art of how do we interpret, and for us to wake up to the fact that everything is an interpretation, okay? So we need to take responsibility for this too and grow with it, changing with the changed, okay? Because what we're seeking is something real that addresses our human condition. And theopoetics is a way of languaging that I think addresses our deepest longing for our deepest longing for interpretation, that it will address us at a deep level of heart and soul and body. There's something about theopoetics that is more embodied than language of proposition and doctrine and dogma. That language doesn't address us at a real heart, soul, and body language, okay, body level. So I'm suggesting that because our experience of the divine, of the holy, of the real is mysterious, it can't be reduced to literalistic or dogmatic language, that theopoetic language can help us. We weave that into interpretation, and I think that it can help us to open our experience of God. And I think it can help us to love the world, because it invites and includes imagination and creativity and embodiment to help us address our condition and our times. Okay. So, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk about this. Theopoetics is hard to describe. There are many people who are suggesting theopoetics in slightly different ways than how I've talked about it today. But I think that theopoetics, theopoiesis, how do we make God happen in our language? You know, here again is when I used last time this notion that our stirrings about our human condition give rise to language and systems, and symbols to try to express our stirrings, which are the very things that create religion. It's the religious impulse to find meaning in our human condition. Okay, I think that's the religious impulse. That our stirrings give rise to symbol and language and images and expressions of those stirrings. And then our thought helps us interpret those. And I think that we need a revolution in thought. That the modern worldview, that framework that's used to interpret our human condition there's lots of good stuff still, But I think in many ways it's run its course. The world is discovering about the nature of reality and possibility and the future. Okay. And I think theopoetics helps to bring us to the immediacy of our world and helps us to see it again and discover in it its holiness and sacredness. Okay, this may all sound a little too abstract. I want to read you a poem now. Speaking of theopoetics, but this is, it's because I think this poem kind of language is something that I'm trying to grapple with. There are things that will interfere with our loving the world. There are, our preoccupations, the stuff that happens in the world, the crazy carousel that we're on, the world is turning so fast. There are a lot of things that are going to keep us from just being able to behold the beauty and behold what is at the heart of the matter here, what is really at the heart of life and being. So there are forces that can line up against, to use Jack Caputo's language, there are forces that can line up against the event. Okay. This poem acknowledges that and calls us to a return to nature and to pay attention to how that makes our souls slip. That's a phrase of Mary Oliver's, the soul, what is the soul? But Mary Oliver says, sometimes you can feel it slip. And it's like a tremor of pure sunlight. Okay. Now that doesn't explain what the soul is or confirm that there is one, but that language, I recognize it. I know what it's like to sometimes feel like the soul slips. Okay. That's theopoetics. Alongside theology, walking side by side with theology, I think can open up our conversations about God and faith. Okay. By the way, side by side, there's a wonderful African proverb that says that the reason that gazelle walk side by side is to blow the dust from each other's eyes. And so it is with us. Okay, this is a poem by Denise Levertov. It's called Sojourns in the Parallel World. We live our lives of human passions, cruelties, dreams, concepts, crimes, and the exercise of virtue in and beside a world devoid of our preoccupations, free from apprehensions, though affected certainly by our actions. Our world, a world parallel to our own, though overlapping. We call it nature, only reluctantly admitting ourselves to be nature too. Whenever we lose track of our obsessions, our self-concerns, because we drift for a minute, an hour even, of pure, well, almost pure response to that insouciant life, cloud, bird, fox, the flow of light, the dancing pilgrimage of water, vast stillness of spellbound ephemerae on a lit window pane, animal voices, mineral hum, wind conversing with rain, ocean with rock, stuttering of fire to coal. Then something tethered in us, hobbled like a donkey on its patch of gnawed grass and thistles, breaks free. No one discovers just where we've been when we're caught up again in our own sphere, where we must return, indeed, to evolve our destinies. But we have changed a little. Thanks, Megan, for putting that up on the screen. I think this poem, Sojourns in the Parallel World, describe the tension that we live in a busy, cacophonous world. Our longing to be connected to the sacred, to finding home in our world. How do we inhabit it? This poem calls us back to nature and our own nature that resonates so deeply with nature. And I love her image of a hobbled donkey. You know, when you hobble a horse or hobble a donkey, they can't move. You bind their legs in such a way that they can't get free. Okay. Hobbled, we so feel hobbled in, as she describes it, a patch of gnawed grass and thistles. We so feel hobbled in the dailiness of our life that we forget the wonder and beauty and vitality and grace and artistry that abounds. The way the light falls on a window pane, that can be an event. We didn't create that. It happened. And then it changes us. And as I said earlier this morning, we have the stuff in us for change and for metamorphosis and for transformation. I think that's a human longing. We long for that experience of transformation. That's part of also who we are. We're capable of it. We're capable of a kind of transformation that in its own way, it's threatening sometimes, but it's a thrill. Okay. I think this poem calls us to pay attention to the world in a way that can help to make us free. And I think good interpretation and the power of language can serve that goodness and will assure, I'll be that confident, that we do have a future and that it will be better. So let me read this poem to you again. We live our lives of human compassions, cruelties, dreams, concepts, crimes, and the exercise of virtue in and beside a world devoid of our preoccupations. Okay? So we inhabit a world that's devoid of our preoccupations and free from apprehensions, even though that world is affected by our actions. Okay? So it's porous, it's permeable. A world parallel to our own. And here I'm talking about the world of wonder and nature and marvel and the sacred, and I would even say God, okay? A world parallel to our own, though overlapping. And by the way, I think theopoiesis is a parallel world to theology, and they overlap. We call it nature, this parallel world that we're in, the world that we inhabit. We call it nature, and only reluctantly admitting ourselves to be nature too. That's the human condition. We are part of nature. Whenever we lose track of our obsessions and our self-concerns, because we drift for a minute, an hour even, of pure, well, almost pure response to that insouciant life, okay? Cloud, bird, fox, the flow of light, the dancing pilgrimage of water, vast stillness of spellbound ephemerae on a lit window pane, animal voices, mineral hum, wind conversing with rain, ocean with rock, stuttering of fire to coal. Then something tethered in us, hobbled like a donkey on its patch of gnawed grass and thistles, breaks free. No one discovers just where we've been when we're caught up again into our own sphere, where we must return, indeed, to evolve our destinies. We must return to the living of our life, but we have changed a little. We have changed a little. And I think that what Denise Levertov is describing, that kind of change helps us to love the world, to love the world. And that's how we will assure a future. Okay. Let me, I want now to spend the rest of our time hearing from you. You know, it's like, gosh, you know, I've really been a talking head for a long time here. And I hope you get a feel for why I think hermeneutics and theopoetics is important. And I do think it has implications for how we break open the way we talk about Christianity in the 21st century. And I'd love to hear from you about that. So in just a moment, we'll start our plenary session. But let me quickly go through the 10 listening guidelines, which I think are great. It's sort of an ethos. It's our courtesy of how we listen to one another. And I think these guidelines apply not just in this setting, but in any number of others. So let me, Megan, why don't you put these up? I'll read these quickly, and then I'll cue you a little bit about the plenary. So as we go into the plenary session, take time to become settled in God's presence. Listen to others with your entire self, your senses, feelings, intuition, imagination, rational faculties. Okay, this is a combination of theopoetics too, incidentally. That's how theopoetic language appeals to the senses, the feelings, the intuition, the imagination, and our rational faculties. But listen to one another with all of that. Do not interrupt. Pause between speakers to absorb what's been said. Don't formulate what you want to say while someone else is speaking. Speak for yourself only, expressing your own thoughts and feelings, and refer to your own experiences, and avoid being hypothetical. Steer away from broad generalizations. Do not challenge what others say. Listen to the group as a whole, to those who have not spoken aloud as well as to those who have, and generally leave space for anyone who may want to speak a first time before speaking a second time yourself. And then hold your desires and opinions, even your convictions, lightly. It's a good note to self. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, what I'd like you to do is think about, what do you make of my take on hermeneutics, theopoetics, the implications for how we understand and talk about Christianity in the 21st century? Does this tie together at all for you? Does this seem as important to you as it does to me? Help me out with this, okay? I'd love to know your thoughts. I'm going to ring the bell and give us just a minute to see what thoughts come up. And this will give you a little bit more time to put something in the chat if you want. My beloved friend Jeff Creswell will do the best that we can to call on people to make some comments in the time that we have. But let's just give this minute of silence to just let all my talk kind of settle and see what emerges for you, and to bring that to the fore. Okay, so I'm going to ring the bell. I'll ring it at the end of 1 minute as well. Did you hear that? Let me do that again. Okay. Okay. So curious to know what you make of all of this today. Jeff, I see Ken. Hello, Ken. Let me check in with Jeff Creswell. Jeff, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you help us out with calling on folks to see who might like to comment to all of my?
Yes. Yes, Marianne, what I've done is I've written down the names of people who have comments in the chat and a word or two about that specific comment, because some people have made multiple comments.
Okie doke.
So what I'd like to do is to invite those people, when I call their name, to unmute themselves and then ask you that comment or make that comment or ask the question by unmuting themselves. And just so people know, in the lower left-hand corner of the screen, you'll find your little mute button to unmute. And if you did put a comment in the chat, I would invite you to definitely check where your mute button is now. So that if you call your name, you don't have to go fumbling around to find it. The other place you can find it is in the actual little video box with your photo in it. You will find it in the upper right-hand corner. So either in the upper right-hand corner of your picture or in the lower left-hand corner of the full screen where you see Marianne. So now that I've crossed your eyes, maybe we can begin.
Well, I think I crossed their eyes, I'm sure, or made them roll. Whatever.
So Marianne, I thought I'd start by mentioning a very interesting comment from Aura Lee.
Oh,
and Aura Lee said, the Netflix movie about the octopus teacher is an extraordinary example of living in Levertov's poem.
Love it.
Yes, I saw that movie last night and I was so moved by it. I just highly recommend it. And the man who spent a whole year developing a relationship with an octopus came back a very changed person. It's definitely a movie that highlights the postmodern thinking and our connection with and touch and being part of nature. He ends it in a beautiful way that would fit with your theopoetics.
Right. Yeah. Orly, I've seen that movie also. My octopus as teacher, or my
something like that.
Teacher is, it is exquisite. And what's amazing is that the octopus actually redeemed and revived his own humanity. His humanity.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's it. Yes, we should have it required that everybody watch that movie because there's something in that is so true. Okay, here I'm saying there are no absolute truths, but the truth of that movie, I think, will touch everyone and that they'll recognize it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you for that. Yeah, lovely.
Thank you, Orly.
Yeah.
Celia Chesed had a comment about rhizomes.
Yes.
You might bring that up.
I would love to hear you talk about, rhizomes. I actually thought about using that as an image, but tell me, bring it to me.
Hi, thank you. We've been having an active discussion in the chat. Chesed is actually the Hebrew word for loving kindness. The idea of the rhizomes, which I was just pointing out that I think of that as sort of the structural image for postmodernism, that the rhizome replaces the sphere, say, which has a fixed center, and the rhizome has multiple equal centers that growth can take place like a deep root out of any particular node without privileging any one particular node.
Perfect. And yes, I love this. I think it's a great image for postmodernism. Rhizomes it's the root system that goes horizontally, right? It's a root system that goes out, and then growth comes up. And you put it perfectly that, not one thing is privileged over another, but that there's this spreading out, and then life pops up in all kinds of places. And so the rhizome as a root system is a wonderful description, I think, of how postmoderns see the web interconnectedness, vitality, life of the world and how it works. And it's right there in nature.
Mm.
Did I get that right, Celia? Are you still there?
Yes, she just put up a thumb.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. I love that. Rhizome, I mean, how often do we hear that word thrown around? We can Google it, everybody. Rhizome. RHI.
Z-O.
Yeah, right. Okay.
David Depew had a comment about hermeneutics.
I'd love it. David Depew. I know David. He's a friend. David.
Good morning. I thought that was a wonderful discussion of hermeneutics.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Because you're a philosopher, my friend. I am not. So
No, it's great. I just had a comment down there and see what you say, but
yeah.
That because the modernist view of truth is factuality, which can get us into a lot of trouble. A kind of a hermeneutic antidote for the dominance of that way of thinking in our mind is to think of meaning as in hermeneutics as more important than truth, or as redefining truth. So you can easily apply this to scripture. So you can get really hung up on, whether it's such and such a passage was really said by Jesus or historically accurate or whatever. But a hermeneutic approach to it, which I think is what the intention of contemporary scripture studies is really, is to think about the meaning of the thing. So somebody put up in the chat when you talked about, what kinds of, somebody was talking about what books in the scripture, or what things in the scripture sort of lend themselves to hermeneutics. Somebody mentioned the parables. So the open-endedness of parables, the sort of, somebody also mentioned that they're a little like haiku or Buddhist paradoxes of some kind. I think that's exactly right. And then the meaning and the reappropriation of meaning by various audiences then comes to the fore. So I wanted to know what you thought about that.
What I think about
the scriptural application of this idea.
I think I love what you said, that I'm with you, that I think it's about meaning. That the scripture, this is why I think why it continues to speak to us, by the way, is because there's something about the scripture stories and most sacred stories that address something that's deep in the human condition. And I think that we are seeking, we're meaning seekers. We seek meaning as human beings. And I think it has more to do with what does this story mean? Rather than, and Marcus talks about this so much, whether or not, quote unquote, that story is true in a factual way. Like, Black Elk says this, Marcus Borg says this. I don't know if the story happened that way or not, but I know that the story is true. Okay, so I really, you've put it much more crisply than I, but that I think that hermeneutics and theopoetics invites us to explore the meaning of scripture texts. What is the meaning of it? Because I think that's its significance. Is how do these speak to our meaning, our understanding? Do you want to say what you said again, David? Because you were much crisper than I.
I think you conveyed the essential idea perfectly. I really do.
And I don't think it's about fact either. In fact, somebody said
we are really hung up on facts. I mean, that's what modernity is.
I think so too. And somebody said that they felt that absolute truths are interpretations that we forgot were interpretations.
That's true. Just like what we call literalism are dead metaphors.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I think
So-
it's a very liberating view to think of it. And then somebody also mentioned that the word event, which you've been considering for the last couple of meetings, fits into this beautifully. Somebody mentioned that events don't come bearing labels on their foreheads. They are the eruption of something novel into,
Yes.
into the world.
And in the postmodern mind, I think truth is event.
Yeah. Because they're not predictable.
Right. Truth
Facts.
is event.
Yeah. I'm not saying there isn't a place for facts. Like, for instance, if I'm watching the trial of Donald Trump, I want to know the facts.
Yeah. And watching that is, but look at how the facts are interpreted, right? What facts?
But, you know, in the larger picture of theology, I think this shift is really what's needed. And it's hard to get used to. As you said, you've got one foot in one world and one in another.
Yep. But I think it's exciting. And I think it's needed. I think it's essential, frankly. I think it's exciting. And then let's see what the texts have to say to us.
Yeah.
Let's see what these stories communicate. Let's see what we see when we see these stories, and let them happen to us.
Yes.
I think that we will find that, you know, Christianity's stories it's full of wisdom and reality and possibility. And anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's great to see you, David. Glad you're well. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, David. Janet had a comment about us being co-searchers and co-wanderers. I thought you might speak to that, Janet.
I'd much rather be that than the codependent person that I am. So Janet, please.
I'm not sure if I was the Janet you're referencing to. I don't know if there's another Janet. But if it was, I've made so many comments, I'm not quite sure what that one was about. I've been responding to people. But certainly, what I love about the current age is that we've been emancipated to do our own searching. And to encourage people to do that. One of my favorite Bible studies I did with a group was where I just said, I need you to go online. They were a group who particularly liked going online and doing research, and find all the different interpretations you can of, and we did a series of parables. And then I came in with another one, which I happened to like, and we could discuss about how all of this, there was things that appealed in all of them, and there were things that we didn't like in all of them. And then we talked about those growing edges, where we were uncomfortable. And it led to a very different kind of a study. And we have these wonderful options now, with obviously with COVID, and we've all been locked away forever. I work in a homeless shelter, which I've hardly visited for the last year. You know, it's given us a more ability to do that. So I think we really have to take this. And the other concern I have, and it wasn't there, the other last concern I just want to say is, how do we get younger people in on this discussion? Because I know I'm now coming up to 70. I see a lot of other grey hairs. How are we going to do this, people? I'd love to think about, to brainstorm that one. But thank you for calling on me, and I love being part of the discussion. Thank you, Marianne.
Oh, you're so
I saw you in Portland a few times at the seminar. And the dogs.
Indeed. Yes, my beloveds. Yes. I think that this conversation about language and postmodern worldview or postmodern framework, I think this is a way that we can get the young people engaged. Okay, it's not propositional, it's not doctrinal, it's something else. It's more dynamic, it's more ambiguous, which is not a bad thing. I mean, we tend to think ambiguity is a bad thing, but just like uncertainty is a bad thing. But I think that this move, this hermeneutical theopoetic move, is a way that we can get a different generation to get involved in this. Okay, so good question. How do we get young people involved? My hunch is they're ahead of us in terms of understanding scripture stories in this way. My hunch is they're ahead of us. But And by the way, I love your comment and David's comment too about parable, because some would say that that was Jesus' preferred way of teaching. And parables are a perfect example, as has already been mentioned, of sort of a postmodern way of, they're not moral tales, they're puzzles. And so, and they engage us. They demand something of us. And I think that, so anyway, it's exciting. I think it's exciting, but thank you so much for your comment and for being part of this. Stay safe.
Sharon Ruth Jackson had a comment about the Quakers that I thought was interesting.
Yes, I am a Quaker, and I saw you at St. Mark's in Sheffield because
okay.
the PCN or whatever group that are saying, look, let's not dismiss science. Let's have science and poetry and literature and make sense of it all. But the Quakers have a kind of some tenets, you know, as you meet a person, see that of God or good or love in them, and that obviously sets the stage of how you respond, you know, what you draw forth, what you elicit from them. And I used to work with children a lot. I'm 76 now. And but people said, oh gosh, how do you manage with these troubled children? And it's that when the child walks through the door, I put out of my head that this child has behavior problems, and I say hello, and I try to elicit something from them and follow, you know, accept them where they are, which might not be where you want them to be or anybody else wants them to be, but that's it. It's accepting others where they are. Somebody made a comment about the level of education and the desire for certainty and stability. You know, when we look through those stages that Piaget talks about, you know, when you give a child a tall glass and one a squat glass, even though they've got the same amount of liquid, when the child with the squat glass starts crying. But we need to meet people where they are and understand where they are and see if we can help them and support them to move. And I like Robert Solomon, the American philosopher, who said, spirituality is the development of the self through the thoughtful love of life. That's not only of other people, the life in other people, but when we meet a flower that actually is growing forth. Or I see the snowdrops coming through in Sheffield now. And there's a lovely book by Kirk Snyder, who's an American psychologist, and it's called The Spirituality of Awe. You know, when we keep that, you know, in a sense, that credulous approach you talked about, that openness of what we see rather than labeling, but we move into that experience. Anyway, I'll stop there. But thank you so much, because you've got a depth of philosophy there that you know, is wonderful and will help people to, you know, and help young people as well, get them to look at alternative. What do you think? Elicit. Churches have so often imposed rather than elicited.
Nice way to put it. Indeed. I think you're absolutely right. We tend to impose rather than invite. Repeat again what the philosopher said about love. Robert
Solomon. Yes. His definition of spirituality. He has a series of lectures that you can listen to and download and books. He's a great thinker. But his definition of spirituality is the development of the self through the thoughtful love of life.
Lovely. Lovely. Lovely.
Or transformation of the self, I think, probably. Maybe I got that wrong, but you get the idea.
Sure. Yeah, transformation is, yes, love it. Thank you. Thank you.
You say, keep your heart open.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. Bill Bradley had a comment relating this to strong and weak theology.
Good.
Yes, I was just,
Brother Bill.
hello there, Marianne. Great to hear you again.
Yes.
I was just saying that the old modernity was basically, like you were saying, an either or proposition with hard, strong truths. And it was the strong theology. Now, and the younger people are getting this way more than we are. And it's out there. I talk to them regularly and it's really nice. I learn a lot. But the postmodernity is more a both and it is a weaker theology. It is a more, and the thing, modernity had units. You joined a club or you became a part of something that had fixed and solid boundaries. In postmodernity, it's more about community. It's more about going out and inviting more people in. It's a lot more inclusive. And that's where we need to, sometimes we turn our modernity truths into idols. There are idols. We have to hold on to that to feel stronger. That's where us old gray hairs and bald heads are getting it wrong. But if we would just be a little bit more community minded and be a little bit more weak about it, we will just, everybody will get in. And I think the event that's coming is going to be major. There's a lot of little events, but the big major event when we all get together is going to be amazing. So that was my comment. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. Well, I am hopeful also. I am hopeful. And I think that the absolutisms of modernity is, I agree with you. It's, they become idols and there's no life in an idol. So anyway, I think that for all of the stuff that's happening in the world today, I am hopeful because of the conversation that we're having today. So Jeff, maybe we have time for one more and then I will close.
Yeah. Kathleen Wakefield had a comment about from John's Gospel about I am the way.
Okay.
Well, I think that's been interpreted by Christianity, by traditional Christianity and Christians in a very potentially destructive way, as if there is a single absolute way to knowing God and the world. And I think for some traditional Christians, it's very hard for them to let go of this, and we have to. The way and the life and the light are all images that are used by other faith traditions as well. So there's much I love about John, and there's much that I resist in John, and particularly the way this passage has been interpreted. So I'm sort of thinking of, the image of the way may be more productively and creatively interpreted imagistically, that we don't see it. We see it as an idea or a concept or a theology versus a path among many paths. So I guess I'm thinking of it more theopoetically than, traditionally.
Yeah. Well, and it's, there's a wonderful story about Marcus actually refers to this in one of his books. There was a Hindu that was asked to speak at chapel at a seminary. And the text was the one that you just referred to, Jesus saying, I'm the way, the truth, the life. And this person said, and that way is known in all the great traditions. Okay. So if we absolutize the way, Jesus is the way, then we're sort of in this mindset of absolute. But if we say that Jesus is the way, and that way is known in so many diverse expressions. We live in so many different ways, but there's something at the heart of how we live about love and compassion and justice, and that's the way. Okay. So again, it's like capital T truths, it's the way, and that way is known to the heart of humanity, okay? And not to absolutize. I agree with you. So I think if any of us are called to preach on that text, we should do that thoughtfully and not absolutize it, but recognize that, and that way is known in a myriad of ways, expressed in a myriad of ways. Does that make sense?
Yes, like there are spokes, many spokes, and orange has many segments, and we don't know the whole is something bigger than we know, and indigenous traditions of that we could learn a lot.
I agree.
Thank you.
To the end of time, to the end of our time. I was, let me tell you that when we show our last slide that will just remind you of the next date, which is March 13th, that you're going to hear a song from Van Morrison. I was going to read you some of his lyrics, but I'm not going to take the time for that. But the song is called Enlightenment. Don't know what it is. I actually love this song. He says, enlightenment, don't know what it is. You know, what's the hand, you know, carry wood, chop wood, carry water. What's the sound of one hand clapping? Enlightenment, don't know what it is. And toward the end
How did they do that?
Pardon?
Reading the headlines.
Toward the end of that, he says, you know, it's up to you. It's up to you. And I think the last verse, the last words of this lyric of this song is, it's how you think. So anyway, I love this song, Enlightenment by Van Morrison. You'll hear that at the very close of this. Let me tell you that next month we will have a guest, Diana Butler Bass, a friend of mine and a friend of Marcus's. She's just finished a new book called Freeing Jesus. And I'm going to have Diana as a guest. I'm going to talk to her about her book and what she makes of Christianity in the 21st century. So we'll be in the season of Lent. So I will talk a little bit about Lent. And we'll have plenty of time to have Diana talk with us and spend some time. So I'm looking forward to that. Let me close with this poem. Actually, it's a brief paragraph. It might as well be a poem by Dostoevsky. Okay, and I'll read it to you twice. I'll read it twice, and I think that this is a. If it's up to us, how we inhabit the world and how we interpret it, consider this. Okay, from Dostoevsky. Love the animals. Love the plants. Love everything. If you love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in things. And once you perceive it, you will begin to comprehend it better every day. And you will come at last to love the whole world with an all-embracing love. And if we do this, I dare say, we have a future. One more time, from Dostoevsky. Love the animals, love the plants, love everything. If you love everything, you will perceive the divine mystery in things. And once you perceive it, you will begin to comprehend it better every day. And you will come at last to love the whole world with an all-embracing love. Life is short, and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel the way with us. So be swift to love and make haste to be kind. Thank you for being with me today. I look forward to seeing you next time. Stay safe and deep peace.